about 40 years ago, the mayor of Montreal, Jean Drapeau, said it was no more possible for the Olympics to lose money than for a man to get pregnant. It was a joke, and of course the joke was on him. The Olympics lost a lot of money. Well, if that mayor were around today, that joke would likely be illegal. Let me quote to you from an article in the Edmonton Journal. This is amazing. Quote, "The university has said it's perfectly okay to fire people for doubting that men can get pregnant, for doubting lesbians can have penises. The implications are very dangerous because this is a live issue in our contemporary Canadian democracy." It's not a joke anymore. Our next guest is a professor of anthropology at the University of Alberta, my own alma mater, who was fired from an administrative position because she doubts that men can get pregnant. She is a feminist. In fact, I think she's the polar opposite to Rebel News on most ideological issues, but she has been sacked by political correctness nonetheless. Professor Kathleen Lowrey joins us now via Skype. Professor Lowrey, thank you very much for joining the show today.
Hi, thank you for having me.
Did I accurately summarize what happened? I see a copy of your letter in the Edmonton Journal. You were fired because you wanted to talk about feminism and that women, biological women, are different than trans women. Am I correct?
Well, yes, and there's actually been developments since then that I think are even more interesting. So I want to quickly dispense with what's been in the news so far, because on my dismissal back in March, my faculty association is backing me up because it wasn't handled according to proper disciplinary procedures. So I think on that, I'm likely to prevail. I think the faculty association just has sort of an airtight case. But what's happened since then, what's happened with all the publicity around this, is there's a kind of burgeoning round two. So the burgeoning round two is, once this was in the news, colleagues, students, and particularly student journalists from the University of Alberta Gateway newspaper started combing through my social media history. So I always comment on social media under my real name, and particularly they've combed through my social media history on a site called Spinster. So kind of a tongue-in-cheek name. Spinster is something like gender-critical feminist Twitter. And I think this next stage, I think, is going to be the more interesting stage, because I think it's not going to turn on. It's not going to primarily turn, I don't believe, on my academic freedom, which most of the discussion so far has been framed in terms of, but it's actually going to raise issues about what any Canadian can say about gender and gender identity. So I'm just going to go. Is it okay if I just keep sort of wrapping on?
Please, we want to learn. Okay. Can I just read one more, before you do, Professor, may I read just one more line from the Edmonton Journal? Because I'm up to speed with your case as far as that article, but can I just give one more fact to our viewers before you go deeper? Because our viewers are likely new to this.
Yeah.
So I'm just quoting from what you told the Journal. I think it's very on point, and then please do continue. Because I think this is what you got in trouble for, and correct me if I'm wrong. This is you in the Journal. "I said on the first day of class, we're going to read material in this class that are currently out of fashion in academia. You certainly don't have to agree with me. Since this is a university, I think it's important to be exposed to. This is important literature you should be aware of." So basically, you took the traditional feminist point of view as opposed to the transgender point of view, and you let your students know, they might find it disagreeable. So that was what got you in trouble, stage one. Am I correct in that?
Well, I can't know because the complaints are confidential, but I don't think it was actually any students in that course. I think it was students who heard that I kind of existed as a gender critical feminist who complained, because even the students who by the end of the course didn't agree with me, they all really appreciated being exposed to this literature. So the students who actually were in a learning situation were not traumatized by being in a learning situation. But I think my problems come from a much greater number of students who are traumatized to learn that I exist on campus and I have bad thoughts.
So step one was the academic administrative position firing, and you're saying you're in phase two, which is the mob combing through your historic tweets.
And this one I think is really going to be interesting, because I think, you know, the mob is coming for me, and there's no way they're not going to get me. And it's not because I've said anything terrible or hateful, or I think that trans people should be bonked on the head. It's because gender critical feminism is in direct collision with gender identity ideology, and particular gender identity ideology as is enshrined in Bill C-16. So your viewers, listeners, may not know what Bill C-16 is. It's a bill that was introduced in 2017 that added gender identity and expression to the grounds on which people couldn't be discriminated in the Canadian Charter of Rights and Freedoms. So the critical part, so now gender identity is being treated very reverentially. Now, that's quite different from the sort of traditional feminist approach to gender. So the traditional feminist approach, which now gets called gender critical or radical feminism, but in the olden days used to be just feminism. The old approach to gender was biological sex is real, people are born, it's a boy or a girl, and then societies kind of place gender expectations on these people who are born, and these gender expectations tend to be hierarchical and tend to contribute to the oppression of women, so that, you know, men are supposed to be leaders and women are supposed to be docile followers, those kinds of expectations. So the feminism of a generation ago said, look, this is wrong. People are born and we shouldn't put these kinds of gender expectations on them. What we should do is we should abolish gender. So the attitude to, say, a little boy who enjoyed tea parties and wearing tutus would be, well, you know, knock yourself out. You're a little boy, are you there, who enjoys tea parties and tutus. And the idea that feminists had was that this process would be liberatory. If we stopped expecting people to fit gender identity categories, people would be happier and society as a whole would become better. Now, this has really changed, and it's now changed not just in academic discourse and a lot of popular discourse, but it's now changed in Canadian law. So this means we have to have a kind of reverential embrace of gender stereotypes. So that same little boy born now who likes tea parties and wants to wear a tutu, you say, oh my gosh, your gender identity is that of a girl. So you were born in the wrong body, and we understand, we're going to affirm your gender identity, and we're going to raise you as a little girl. So people who don't feel they fit into the category of gender stereotype girl or gender stereotype boy, those people are now called non-binary, which an older feminism would have said, that's everybody. I mean, no one can fit perfectly into the categories of gender, because the categories of gender, their expectations are so rigid.
That's an excerpt from my daily show, The Ezra Levant Show. Every day I do a monologue on the news of the day, then I interview an interesting guest, and then I read my hate mail. You gotta subscribe. Go to rebelnews.com.